Hey everyone, Z-Slayer Dre here, and today I'll be reviewing Yakuza Like a Dragon, developed by Ryuga Gotaku Studio and published by Sega. Yakuza Like a Dragon is, pretty much your typical game. Honestly, really nothing out of the ordinary happens.
What did you do to my hair?
I tried. It's just when you asked for a punch perm, I had to look it up.
This made me so sleepy. Yes! Time to call a friend! I summon you!
Oh, Susumu-chan, you're so needy. Okay, time for Baba.
Got it!
Yeah. Anyways, you play as Ichiban Kasuga, a low-level Yakuza who doesn't seem to like crime very much, despite being a member of a criminal organization. Right away you see his admiration for the patriarch of his Yakuza family, Masumi Arakawa. Ichi was rescued by Arakawa when he was younger and now views him as a father figure and a role model. Eventually Ichi is asked to take the fall and go to prison for a murder he did not commit to protect another member of the Arakawa family. After serving nearly 20 years in prison, once released, Ichiban runs into a string of unfortunate events and is left for dead. He is nursed back to health by a former nurse named Namba in a homeless community, is now homeless himself on the streets of Jincho, and this is where the prologue ends and the game proper starts. After this, the game sort of forgets the plot for quite some time as Ichiban meets and makes an impression on the Jincho community as he helps them out. While the plot points seem quite random, they do all have some small connection to the overarching plot, which I don't want to spoil. That said, a lot of Yakuza Like a Dragon is about the journey, not necessarily the destination, as there is a ton of content in the game. First off, while this game does slightly tie into the rest of the Yakuza games, which I'll talk more about later, for the most part, this is a new story with new characters, so newcomers to the series can feel comfortable playing this game, and will be able to follow the plot just fine. And while the previous games were action melee combat games, Like a Dragon shifts to turn-based combat. Whenever a long-standing series makes a drastic change like this, there is the potential for it to feel awkward, but in this case, Ryuga Gotaku Studio did an incredible job, and this game still retains the feel of a Yakuza game. Part of the reason this works so well is because of the main character Ichiban. He is easygoing and lighthearted with a strong sense of justice. He is just too nice of a guy to be unlikable, and his charm and internal optimism rubs off on everyone he meets. Unfortunately for Ichiban, he's probably had the worst life imaginable. Instead of letting one misfortune after another get him down, Ichi continues to stay positive and loyal to the people who have shown him kindness. His personality and charm helps him throughout the game build up a cast of misfits that join him on his various quests throughout the game. If you've played a Yakuza game in the past, you already know they are packed to the brim with content, minigames, and tons of gameplay mechanics, and Like a Dragon is no different. I don't think I could possibly go over everything, but let's get started with the combat. Like I said earlier, the combat changed from an action brawler to a turn-based RPG, which could have gone horribly wrong if not done correctly. Fortunately, Ryuga Gotaku Studio absolutely nailed it, and even though the combat is drastically different from the previous games, it still has the same feel to it. Combat moves are stylish and packed with humor. I couldn't wait to unlock new moves just to see what would happen when I used them, just because it was so entertaining. Like in previous games, your characters can pick up items they find around them and bash their enemies with them, although this time around, the game will automatically do it for you. Each character in your party will have their own unique moves and also gain additional moves from leveling up in the job system. The job system does tie into the story as well, but jobs are basically classes that you can change between as often as you'd like. Each job has 2 special moves that can be carried over even when you change to a different job, which made it fun and rewarding to try out every different job. Jobs ranged from homeless guy to musician and everything in between. Each character also starts off with their own unique job, which helps gives each person in your party a unique feel. Also, some stat games are permanent while leveling up in a job, which is one of the main ways to build up your character. For example, if you had someone who you wanted to focus on magic attacks, you would level them up in jobs that gave permanent boost to mana and magic attacks. You can also further customize each character with a weapon and a few pieces of gear as well. It's not the most in-depth system I've ever seen, and I think they kept it somewhat simple so they wouldn't alienate longtime series fans, but despite that, it was still a really well thought out progression system. And I say that as someone who typically does not enjoy job-based RPG systems. This is really the first time I've seen it work this well and be satisfying from a character progression standpoint. And I have to say, this is the first time I've actually used every single character in my party. Usually, you have a few that you just, once you get them, they sit on the bench, but this time around, they were all just so much fun to use that I found myself switching out and trying out every character. You also do have character levels independent from the job levels, so that when you change jobs, your characters don't entirely go back to level 1, which is a good thing considering the game can get quite challenging at times, but more on that later. While all characters have your standard stats that you see in most RPGs, Ichiban has an additional set of stats called personality traits that are unique just to him. You get experience for these stats from doing in-game challenges, quests, and, well, basically almost everything. Leveling up these stats can unlock new jobs and help Ichiban in the dating scene. For other characters, they have a bond level with Ichiban which will unlock new jobs at certain levels. Also, as the bond level increases, you get to have special cutscenes with that party member to get to know them better. These additional stories were really well done and help flesh out all of the characters in Ichiban's party. As for the minigames, there are so many, I think there might be literally dozens of them in the game. I was actually shocked at the high quality of each game and just how much fun they were. The business minigame was a favorite, and it almost could have been a game in itself. Due to story reasons, Ichiban becomes a CEO of a struggling business. I mean, of course, who else could run a business better than a homeless person who is a former game member? Right? Through this minigame, you can hire employees, upgrade, buy, and sell new businesses, and of course, the most important thing, just like in real life, please the shareholders. Every quarter you get a minigame inside the minigame where you have to make sure the shareholders are happy by either apologizing to them or having one of your employees appease them. Either action will damage the shareholder, and once you drain their HP, they fall back in their seat with hearts floating above their head. You know this sounds kind of insane when I say it out loud, but seriously, it's really fun. If you win the minigame, your stock price goes up, and you increase your rank in the local index. The minigame sets goals that are actually challenging to meet, but really satisfying when you pull them off. This is also one of the main ways to make money in the game, which is almost required due to several major money sinks in the game, but more on that later in the review. Outside of the business minigame, there's also even an entire Mario Kart style go-kart game that even has its own mini storyline and online rankings. Don't get me wrong, the controls aren't nearly as tight as Mario Kart, but it's still just another fun time sink in the game. There's also the vocational school that allows you to take tests that will improve Ichiban's characteristic stats. These tests are no joke either. You only need to get 3 out of 5 questions correct on the test, but they are real-world questions, some of which are not necessarily common knowledge. They're actually pretty expensive to take and timed, so if you're into trivia, you'll probably have a good time with them. There's also the Can Quest game where you go around on town on a bicycle collecting cans to recycle for points that allow you to buy items. I could go on and on all day. There's baseball, golf, gambling, karaoke, a game where you have to fend off rams so you don't fall asleep at the movies. There's just so many games within the game to enjoy. Part of the fun is just going around the map to see what you'll discover next. Speaking of the map, while there are a few zones, you mostly spend your time in Jinsho, and while it's not the biggest open world map, it's so densely packed with content, the size is just perfect. It's so nice to see an open world game focus on the quality of the map for a change over the sheer size alone. Instead of having vast, empty areas, there's something new to enjoy or discover on every street corner. Outside of the story and minigames, there's also a ton of side quests. I felt like this was one of the weaker areas of the game, but there were a few standout quests. Most quests have a moral at the end of the story and are used to unlock gameplay mechanics throughout the game. Some quest lines will also reward you with new employees for the business minigame, or add a new member to Poundmates, which is a phone app that allows you to phone a friend to help you during battle, so the side quests are definitely worth doing. There's also a lot of humor in them, and I have to say, a few really cracked me up, so if you enjoy the Yakuza style of humor, you'll probably enjoy them as well. This is actually my first Yakuza game, and I still can't believe how much good content this game has. With other open world games, you usually have a ton of boring bloat where you run from map marker to map marker, checking things off a to-do list. In Yakuza Like a Dragon, the side content is actually fun and worth doing just as much as playing through the main story even, which is just such a welcome change. But now that we've gone over the basics, let's go over what the game did well and what the game did not do so well. For starters, while there's a large gap in the middle of the game where there's very little story, overall the story had me hooked during the story intense chapters of the game for the most part. While I do think there were a few issues with the story that held it back, overall it was an enjoyable experience. That being said, it's really nothing groundbreaking and it's been done before, but the characters were so interesting and likable, it almost makes you not care about some of the pacing and congruity issues. The story absolutely does not take itself seriously, and there's some hilarious moments, but it also knows when to get serious and provide some really interesting and tense moments along the way. While the story might be a little too over the top for some people, and the humor can be hit or miss depending on your tastes, the characters are so well done you might find yourself enjoying it regardless. Ichiban is a great character. He's basically Goku from Dragon Ball Z. He loves to fight, although it's usually to defend others or to test his own strength, not to mention he's definitely not the sharpest tool in the shed. But he's also honest, kind, and fiercely loyal to his friends and family. I think he'll win over a lot of people that play this game. And one last thing I have to mention about the story is that while this is basically a soft reset for the Yakuza series, it is still technically the 8th game in the mainline continuity. Although in Japan it's Yakuza 7 because there's a Yakuza 0, so I guess it's the 7th game, but it's really the 8th game, but let's just not worry about that. You can absolutely play this game with no prior knowledge of the other games, but I do have to warn you there are some spoilers for previous games. The games are quite long from what I gather, so going through and playing Yakuza 0 through 6 beforehand is a tall order and might seem quite intimidating to most people. Unless you're currently playing through the series right now, I really wouldn't worry about it too much, but it's just something you will have to keep in mind. The side stories were probably one of the weaker aspects of the game. Like I said earlier, some really did crack me up, and there were a few that stood out, but overall, they just didn't feel as engaging as the rest of the game for me. One of the stronger aspects of the game was Ichi and the bonds that he created with his party members and the friendships they forged in Fire. Because you can basically do the side quests at any time, usually the stories will just feature Ichi or just early game party members at most. Removing potential party interactions made the side quests feel weaker than most of the other activities and stories in the game. Not to mention, the new characters introduced in the side stories were usually not nearly as interesting as Ichiban's friends. That said, it's an RPG, so of course I did them all anyways because leveling up reasons. Speaking of Ichiban's friends, who also end up being your party members, the interactions between them and Ichi was really one of the highlights of the game. I really wish I could go over all of your party members, but due to spoiler reasons, I don't want to ruin any surprises. That being said, Ichiban is an outcast of society and his party mates are all basically in the same boat, but because of his friendliness, optimism, and kindness, wins them over and helps create a strong bond with them. Like I said earlier, the main story is nothing overly original, but watching Ichiban fight through adversity while getting to know his friends better was really enjoyable. While they are absent from some of the side stories, there are still plenty of ways to interact with them. You can play mini-games with them, have heart-to-heart conversations to increase your bond level, strike up conversations as you walk past something interesting, or even have conversations when you eat a meal at a restaurant. It's a very character-driven game, and I do think a lot of people are going to enjoy the time spent getting to know these characters. I went with the English voice acting, and overall most actors did a great job. Almost all dialogue is fully voice acted, and I think it's going to come down to personal preference whether you want to go with the Japanese or English voices. There were some odd choices for the style of voice for a few characters, but most voice actors did do a good job. I really don't have many complaints in that department. As far as the main gameplay goes, the turn-based combat is done really well. If you're a fan of Dragon Quest, you'll feel right at home, and it's so well done I think it might even win over some people who are typically not turn-based combat fans. The in-game reason for the turn-based combat is that Ichiban is a die-hard Dragon Quest fan, and turn-based combat is basically how he interprets the fights he has. This allowed the developers to get very creative as you'll battle against a ton of imaginative and downright hilarious enemies throughout your journey. The only minor complaint I have about the combat is that your characters and the enemies will shuffle around the battlefield randomly. Sometimes while you're going through the menu to select an area of effect attack, and then wait for your character to physically walk over to the enemies, the enemy group will move out of range of the attack. You can map a few moves to the D-pad, which can usually solve this issue, but there's so many moves that there will be a few times that you just won't hit all the enemies that you intend to. It's not a major issue, but it can cause some minor annoyances. Outside of that, it is mostly your stereotypical tried and true turn-based combat, but with a few things added in. For instance, you can actually block enemy attacks, which will reduce the damage you receive. Even though it's a simple mechanic, there's just so many different enemy attacks that you actually have to learn the timing and attack patterns of stronger enemies to time out the block properly. It's such a small thing, but it really did give the combat some extra depth and just made me feel much more engaged with it. The timing has a bit of a delay to it, so it won't always work, but when it does, it feels very satisfying. There's also certain attacks that have QuickTime events to add in extra damage. Personally, I can't stand QuickTime events, and after a while, it started to physically make my hand hurt, since you really have to mash the buttons to make it work. There's an option in the menu to turn it off, and the game will randomly generate if you hit the QuickTime or not. I felt like this was a good middle ground, and I ended up turning it off about halfway through the game, and did not look back. So while it wasn't for me, I'm sure some people will enjoy having something extra do while attacking, and it is nice that you can play the game whatever way you enjoy best. And like I said earlier, the combat is no pushover. There's several difficulty spikes, and some boss fights are incredibly difficult. There's one fight in particular that you'll probably have to grind a bit for, but the game gives you several fun ways to grind levels, so I didn't really feel like it was an issue. I also enjoy a challenge, so I was perfectly fine with it, but it might not be for everyone. Once I leveled up for this particular fight, it was still quite challenging and enjoyable. When you die, you can choose a few different options, like being able to restart the fight at full health but paying a hefty fee. You can deposit the money into an ATM at convenience stores, so if you know you're having a particularly hard fight coming up, you can safely store your money in the meantime. There are a few dungeons, and overall the design is pretty basic and mostly just a set of linear paths. Nothing really too creative. That being said, they work within the confines of the game, and I really don't see how they could have been much different considering the game is set in a semi-realistic setting. While I've gone over the main aspects of the game, there's so much more to it, and it's a blast to go through the game discovering new content along the way. So that's it, right? Review over. A game that came out in 2020 is great, and there's no major flaws with it or any controversies, right? Right? Yeah, it's 2020, and this is the gaming industry, so of course there's some issue with the game. You know, this really isn't fun for me as a reviewer. It's really rare that we get single-player experiences, let alone good ones. So when I have to talk about multiple special editions, DLC, microtransactions, and forward compatibility issues, especially when they are present in a good game, it's really disappointing. And no, this isn't the worst case of any said issues, but it's still a issue, and we can't ignore them or it'll just keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse. As a reviewer, I feel as though I need to give people all pertinent information so they can make an informed purchasing decision. Trust me, I just want to talk about a great game, but Sega just had to pull some BS, so let's go over it. So there's a few special editions, each coming with different microtransactions and DLC. About half of it is cosmetic and additional karaoke songs, but the other half of it is mainly in-game boosts and even 2 jobs that are locked behind an additional paywall. I personally can live without the karaoke songs and cosmetic items, although some people really want them, and it's a shame they have to pay an extra $30. That's right, half of the price of the game just to get extra costumes and songs. The other DLC are worse in my opinion because I can't believe that they are charging extra to get 2 more jobs, and from what I hear, they're actually pretty good. Like I said, the game is actually challenging at times, and having more jobs will absolutely make the game easier as you can get more stat boosts for your character. They look like fun jobs too, and I would have loved playing with them, but I'm not paying extra for content that should be in the base game. Other things you can get in the special editions are actual stat boosts and characters for the business management minigame. For people having a hard time with a game, they might feel forced into paying extra to get a certain in-game boost, which is really lame. Personally, I didn't feel the need, and you can absolutely get through the game without any of it, but I like a challenge where others might just want to enjoy the story without much difficulty, and it's perfectly fine either way you enjoy playing a game. I just don't like content artificially being cut out of the game and being resold back to players. While the Yakuza series is getting more and more recognition, it is still somewhat of a cult game, and Sega tailored the DLC to longtime fans and knows they can get away with charging extra. Like I said, this is hardly the worst we've ever seen when it comes to DLC, but just because it's not the worst we've ever seen doesn't mean we shouldn't call it out. There's also some confusion when it comes to forward compatibility when it comes to the new consoles, so I'm going to go over what I found on the internet about that. As far as I can tell, the next-gen version is already out for Xbox and has smart delivery along with multiple graphic settings for the Series S and X versions. However, for the PlayStation version, it's not that simple and it will not release until March 2021. It seems like there will not be cross-saves between the PlayStation 4 and 5 version, which is just an absolute shame. I really don't know why there can't be cross-saves, and personally, for me, I was planning to play New Game Plus once I got a PlayStation 5, so it's incredibly disappointing that I will not be able to do so. Instead, we'll have to start over a new game basically when I get a PlayStation 5. So this is just basically something to keep in mind if you do end up buying the PlayStation version. You just won't get cross-saves, unfortunately, so you'll have to decide if you want to wait till you buy a PlayStation 5 to get the game, or if you're fine with just playing it on PlayStation 4. Honestly, it ran quite well on PlayStation 4. There was really very few bugs outside of, there's pretty bad pop-in, but for the most part, the frame rate was stable. The resolution's not too high, but for a turn-based RPG, it worked perfectly fine. So you should feel comfortable getting the PlayStation 4 version, but you just, do unfortunately have to worry about if you do enjoy the game, if you're halfway playing through it, when you get a PlayStation 5, you're going to have to keep playing it on the PlayStation 4. I don't know why they have to do it that way. So while there are a few minor issues, overall, it's a great game. I had no idea what to expect going in, and I'm still shocked at how much fun I had with this game. So much that I'm even planning on going for the Platinum Trophy. You get a ton of content, probably around 45 hours if you rush through, although if you play even some of the side content, you can easily get over 60 hours, and completionists can get well over 100 hours, not including New Game Plus. From the great characters, to the interesting story, combat, and minigames, to the beautiful streets of Japan, Yakuza Like a Dragon will be an incredibly enjoyable experience for most people. That being said, I'm going to give Yakuza Like a Dragon an 8.3 out of 10. I would have never thought this going into the game, but it might be one of the best JRPGs I've ever played. If you're a fan of the Yakuza series, JRPGs, turn-based combat, or even just RPGs in general, it's a must-buy even at full price. Like I said, this might even win over some people who are typically not into turn-based combat as well. That being said, if you've hated every RPG you've ever played, this might not be for you unless you're a huge Yakuza fan. Worst case, if you're curious but not sure, just wait for a steep sale and buy it then. If you do think you want some of the DLC from the special editions of the game, it's going on sale pretty frequently now. If you see the $90 edition going for $60 or less, I would say that's worth it, but I absolutely would not pay more than $60. The game is packed to the brim with content, so the standard edition is honestly what I think most people should go for, as we should not reward Sega for removing content from the game and selling it back to us. It's such a shame that this great game has that one dark stain on it, but that's gaming for us now, and nothing will change unless we vote with our wallets. Like a Dragon is almost certainly to be on my upcoming top 5 games of 2020 and potentially Game of the Year, but I still have a few more games to review, so we'll have to see what happens. Honestly, it's won me over as a fan, and I'll definitely be playing through the rest of the franchise once I get some spare time. If you're a fan of the Yakuza franchise, let me know down in the comments how you feel about the change to turn-based combat. I'm actually pretty curious to see how people feel about that. Also, if you've played the game and would like to see a video talking about the story of the game and discussing it in more detail, let me know. I'll honestly take any excuse to keep talking about this game. That video would obviously have major spoilers in it, but it would be so much fun to talk about all the characters and story in greater detail. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you're subscribed and hit the like button. I still have a few more games to review from 2020, and I'm really excited to see what makes the cut in my top 5 games of the year video. Right now, I'm working on Final Fantasy VII Remake, and then I'll probably go do Doom Eternal and World of Warcraft Shadowlands after. There's a few others I might review, but I might actually run into some time issues, as I have to get started on next year's games when Hitman 3 comes out in a few weeks, so we'll have to see what happens. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.